How we doing, guys? All right. You know, Vinny is so great to thank everyone, and he really is leading the charge for our men's ministry and men's breakfasts. So let's give it up for Coach Vinny. Well, I'm really excited to get to introduce our guest speaker today. Believe it or not, I met him right here at a men's breakfast. That's how we first met. And I love it because hopefully you're getting to know brand new people at your table, and you just never know what the Lord's going to do. But Ramon Baez is a retired senior vice president at Hewlett-Packard, CIO, Chief Information Officer. And I loved it on his bio. One of his titles was, if I got it right, Customer Evangelist. So I like the ring of that, you know. But yeah. So would you give a warm welcome to Ramon Baez?
That is true. My boss, well, I'll get into that in a minute, but my boss, what ended up happening was we were splitting the company up, and he asked me what company did I want to be the chief information officer over. And I said, neither. I came here to manage the big kahuna, you know, the big enchilada, not half the burrito. And I said, I wanted to do something more customer facing. He goes, well, then we got to come up with a title for you. And the first title was SVP of Customer Advocacy. And as time went on, I said, I really don't want all this large organization. I don't want any of this stuff. All I want to do is meet with customers and so forth. He goes, then we're going to call you the customer evangelist. I go, amen, brother. So now I actually go by the CIO evangelist, you know, when I'm out there speaking because I'm retired or semi-retired. Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Tom, because it's been awesome to come here. My wife and I purchased a home here a couple years ago, and we were searching for a home church. And we actually went to Calvary Chapel here locally, because we went to a Calvary Chapel in Chino Hills, California. And they talked about a church called Mountainbrook. And my wife goes, I like the sound of that. And I said, all right, well, let's go online. Well, in church, she's going with her phone. She's like, how pretty it is. And I go, well, honey, we're not going to go to church because it's pretty. Let's make sure, you know, this is really the right place. And what's amazing, I don't know if you've ever watched the sermons online. You know, you have an incredible archive. And we were traveling, we would watch them online. And I said, that's the church we're going to. And it was great to meet you. And Vinny, you've been phenomenal. You and Jay both welcomed me incredibly when I came here a year ago. And I just felt really comfortable here the very first time. And, you know, it's funny when you have a name like Ramon, they'll call you Roman, Ruben, Raul, you know, and all that. Well, Vinny sent the email out, he goes, Ramon Baez, and I thought, oh, maybe they're going to think it's Roman Gabriel coming. But anyway, thank you so much for allowing me to be here and share our story. Before I get into this, I am married to Kelly Baez, or her maiden name was Kelly Salazar. We met on Good Friday in 1997, and that weekend she made her commitment to Christ, and she gave her heart to the Lord. And that was on, again, it was Good Friday on Easter Sunday, and that was at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. And that's actually the church we got married in. So it was a second marriage for both of us. And so Kelly and I, everyone thought we were going to have more kids, but we had 3 big children. I mean, our kids are 38 now, 38, 37, and 35. So I said, no, I don't want like this, you know, midget family and, you know, big family. I go, let's just get a dog. So we got Grace. Her name was Saved by Grace. She was a yellow lab. And she was with us for 16 years. Just an amazing, amazing dog. And now we have 2 little dogs, one called Selah, or Salah, like what David would say, who pause and meditate. Well, Selah, she has pause, but she does not meditate. And then we have Micah. And, you know, we wanted to, we got the third, she never had a boy dog. And I said, let's get a boy dog this time, you know. And she goes, what do we call it? I go, well, let's search for cool names. And I said, well, Micah, it's a gift of God, you know, gift of the Lord. Let's call him that. And he's Micah the Miki. Now, Miki is a Maltese Papillon Japanese champion. We used to call them mutts. Expensive mutt. So anyway, what I want to do today is share with you my faith story. We all have a faith story. And I think it's important to be able to share our faith story, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's a crowd, with a group of people. And this is awesome. We have a group of men here. And it's incredibly important to be able to do that. But what's also important is the bond that we get as men and getting to know each other. And the best way to get to know each other is to know your faith story. So when Vinny and I talked on April 24th, my stomach started turning. I go, what? You want me to come and do what? He goes, well, Pastor Tom thought it'd be really cool to do. And then I got a text from Pastor Tom and says, hey, Vinny's going to call you. Too late. He already did. So, but anyway, I want to start with our family. My family, and because it's important to really set that stage. And my mom and dad were both born on the island of Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico. And they were only born from a few miles apart from each other, but they did not meet in Puerto Rico. They met in a place called Cleveland, Ohio. And kind of bizarre that Puerto Ricans would go to Ohio versus New York, because that's where, if you see Puerto Ricans on the East Coast, you see them in New York. But my grandfather, when they did the mass exodus of Puerto Rico in the 40s, he did not want to go to New York because that's where everyone was going. He decided to go to Cleveland. And so my parents ended up meeting there in 1958. My mom just actually gave me the detailed story. My mom has the beginning signs of dementia. So her short-term memory is horrible, but her long-term memory is like a DVR. And it's just incredible. And the drive that my wife and I made to bring our cars here to Avila Beach last June, I called my mom and I talked to her for 90 minutes on the phone. Of course, I had Bluetooth on. And she actually walked me through that story and so forth. But why it's important to know this is usually Latins or Hispanic, they're usually Roman Catholic. And so in our family, we were no different. You were either Roman Catholic or Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, two dichotomies, of faiths, if you will. And I, as a kid, grew up. I actually went to catechism until I think the age of 10, and then at the age of 10 to 14, I was a Jehovah's Witnesses, the family called them JWs, and it was a really weird time because none of my friends that I knew in school even thought about being a Jehovah's Witnesses. Are you one of those guys that go door to door? I go, no, I don't do that. I just, we have book studies. We didn't call them Bible studies, by the way. We call them book studies. And that should have been a clue that, this is a really bizarre situation. So at the age of 14, for whatever reason, in our family, we call these religious wars, this Catholics between the JWs. At the age of 14, I said, I want nothing to do with either of those faiths, because these people, all they do is fight. And that's something I didn't want to be a part of. And so, unfortunately, I probably had a very bizarre time because I didn't really have any faith. But what was happening was God was whispering to me that whole 20 years. So I'm going to fast forward now 20 years. But in that 20-year period, he was actually saying things to me, and the problem was I wasn't listening. There were times in my life where I was down and out. I mean, which I'm not going to share with you, but I was down and out. I mean, on the floor, horrible life, and I wasn't listening. And he was sharing with me, this is what's going to happen to you. And I thought, I don't know where that thought just came from. I don't know if that's a dream, but that's not where I'm going. That is not going to be me. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, through that generation, if you will, in 1995, in January 1995, I got a text message from my brother. I was on the beach at Seal Beach. Remember this like it was yesterday. Call me. Think about it. It wasn't a text message. It was a pager. Right. I just heard, but it was a text pager. That was really cool at the time. But it was only one way. You couldn't like respond. So I'd call him. I said, "What? What do you want? I'm with Michelle." And he says, "Poppy died." He goes, "I'm sorry to tell you on the phone." And Poppy was my grandfather. I was very close to Poppy. His name's Ramon Baez. Also, he is the 5th. My father's the 6th. I'm the 7th. My son's the 8th, and my grandson's the 9th.
Wow.
Because we are very unimaginative on names, other than Selah and Micah. So, but when it came to the boys, we just kind of messed up there. So my grandfather passes away, and I'm just devastated that he died, because I really just, I had a close relationship. I was in my mid-30s, really blessed to be able to have my grandfather around that long. And when he passed away, we had a memorial afterwards at my grandparents' house. And I opened up this photo album. My grandmother always had photo albums out, and we had such a big family. They had 16 children between the two of them. And they were only married once. And 14 made it to adulthood. So the pictures were always hilarious. So I'm going through this photo album. My grandfather is in a pool. And I said, "Why is Poppy in the pool?" They go, "Oh, 6 months ago he got baptized." I go, "What?" Poppy did not believe in God. He had no faith whatsoever. All he did was curse God his whole life. He goes, "No, 6 months before he died, he was baptized." Now, he was baptized Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's a whole issue with that, but he was baptized. And all of a sudden, the room became incredibly quiet. And it wasn't quiet. It was noisy, but to me it was quiet. And there was a whisper. And that whisper said, "Are you going to wait till you're 89 years old to search for me?" And that's all it was. And then all the noise happened, and all this, family. We're like the big fat Greek wedding. Think of that, right? Very, very loud family. And we didn't eat lamb, we ate pork. That was just, and I really enjoyed the sausage, by the way. But it was just one of those things. And so I started searching for a church. And my girlfriend at the time, she helped me search, and it turns out she was a Christian, and she was actually guiding me on what church to go to. But they were all far away. Nothing was close to my house. So one day on June 11th, I just did one of these things on the Yellow Pages. Back then we had Yellow Pages in the 90s, believe it or not. And I did this, and there was a church called Chino Hills Calvary Chapel, and it was only 2 miles from my house. And I was driving 50 miles to go to churches. And there was a church 2 miles away. Now, what's really ironic is that Pastor Jack Hibbs and Pastor Tom resemble each other. And believe it or not. So you ever go on, you'll see that.
He's a really good looking.
Good looking guy. You're the better looking of the two. Okay. He's not here. But Pastor Jack, he was in his 30s, and he's having this prophecy series. And I have always loved prophecy, but really didn't understand it. Didn't understand the word eschatology. Didn't understand any of this stuff. But he's having a prophecy series, and he's having this guy from Israel up on the pulpit that day. And I don't get it. Why is there a Jew up there doing this? And how does this relate to Christianity? And all this stuff. I didn't really understand my faith. I mean, I made the commitment to Christ, and I want to follow you. No, not yet. I didn't make the commitment yet. But I thought, I don't really understand my faith if I'm going to follow Christ going forward. And then a month later, so we had 4 weeks of prophecy series. I went back again. And on July 9th, 1995, he's there talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39. Well, it's Old Testament, and he's talking about Gog and Magog and Rosh and this and that. And I'm like, what is this all about? And it was like quiet again. And another whisper. And he says, "Are you going to follow me?" And that was the day I made my commitment. And why it was so important, what makes me shake, is because what happened to me from that moment forward was he used things that I understood. I was in the stealth bomber program. I was involved in some of the war weapon systems that we made at Northrop Grumman. I worked there at that time for 20 years, and he's talking about nuclear warfare. And he's relating the 38 and 39, where how God is protecting his name by protecting Israel from Russia, from Persia, and so forth. And I am just shaking in my seat. And at the end of the sermon, he asked, does anybody want to make a commitment? There's 1,000 people. And there was only one person that raised their hand. And I look around, that person was me. And I raised my hand. And my girlfriend's like, she didn't know what was going on. And we walked back to the room where they want you to, give you a Bible. They want to give you, welcome to the church and all these kind of good things. And she's looking at me. She goes, why are we here? I said, I just made a commitment. And what made it so real for me is that instantaneously my tongue was cleansed. I no longer cursed. From that moment going forward, I no longer cursed. And I'm wondering why God took my tongue and did that. And the next thing that really happened was bizarre. I'd walk out and all the colors were vivid. So Chino Hills, if you've never been there, we have beautiful hills like this too, and at that time of the year it gets golden brown. It's Golden State versus green. But everything got really, really vivid. Now, it didn't improve my eyesight. It's not going to wear glasses, but everything became very vivid. And then my worldview changed. And it seemed like everything pointed to Israel that was going on in the news. I mean, even think about the news here recently of what's happened between Russia and Iran and Israel and so forth. And just all the discussion, it's always pointing to Israel. And so when he was going through this, it just blew my mind. But I think why God did that to me was to make it so real for me that I would never forget. Because it's really easy to forget. Well, maybe it was just an emotion. Maybe it was just a feeling when I made my commitment. Because I had such a weird childhood with Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses always fighting. And that's all you ever heard about was religion. And when I learned in Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, it's not about religion. It truly is about a relationship with Christ. And so my life changed forever from that day. And my spiritual birthday is coming up in July. It'll be 22 years. And, it's just amazing. You think about it, that's a whole generation. And I really wanted to use that time differently. I didn't want to be in career. I did not want to be a chief. I did want to be a chief information officer, but at that time, actually, I went to my pastor, Pastor Jack. I said, I'd love to be a pastor. And he put his arm around me and goes, oh, no. Because that's not what you're going to do. We need more of you in the corporate world. I said, but I want to do what you're doing. He goes, we got plenty of me. He goes, we need you in the corporate world. And I said, okay. And from that moment on, the career just took off. And where I went from just having a regional role as a chief information officer for Northrop Grumman for Military Aircraft Systems Division, I then took over all of software engineering, and then I eventually left Northrop and went to go work for Honeywell, and I had a global role, and then Fisher Scientific, Kimberly-Clark, and then eventually the big Hewlett-Packard. We were about $110 billion in revenue at that time, and had this massive role with a group of 8,000 people. And then I remember speaking in India, and there were thousands and thousands of people in the audience, and they all came up to me and said, why are you different than all the other leaders? And when people would ask me that, I would always say, well, why do you think I'm different? What's different? He goes, well, you seem like you have integrity. I said, but why do you think that? And they go, we don't know, that's why we're asking you, right? but I was always cautious to be able to share my faith, but I said, well, okay, you're asking me. I want to make sure you're asking why I'm different. And then I would have a private conversation with them. And so to be able to share my faith with, thousands of people around the world at different times is fantastic. But I'll tell you what, I do speak around the world today, and nothing is harder than having this conversation with you. To me, when it's this personal and it's so meaningful, this is much harder than talking about digital transformation. I know, who cares, right? What did you just say? So, as time went on, I definitely needed to be, honed, right? I mean, you just don't become a Christian all of a sudden you're good at it. And I wanted to be good at sharing my faith. And so I thought, well, I'll just share my faith with the family. That's what I'll do. And I'll tell those Jehovah's Witnesses, you know what, that's a cult. You don't want to believe in this. This is wrong. You guys don't believe in, the 5 essential Christian doctrines and yada, yada. And they're like going, who are you? Because we saw what you were like before you became a Christian. Don't you tell us, right? Don't you tell us what we should be believing. And I did not do it with love. I did it with arrogance. I didn't do it with compassion. I did it with a lot of passion because I'm Puerto Rican, but I didn't do it with compassion. And that was one of the things I had to learn was when you are sharing your faith with someone that is truly seeking the Lord, is do it with love and compassion. And so I joined this ministry called The Call, believe it or not, and it was we used the Evangelism Explosion, and we actually went door to door sharing our faith, and actually saw people on the doorstep make a commitment to Christ and start coming to church. And the one that impacted me the most was we were supposed to go to someone's house, knocked on the door, that person wasn't there, so we said, well, do we want to go left, do we want to go right? And we ended up going left, went into this one house in the back. There was this elderly man in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank in his nose, and we shared the gospel with him. He made a commitment to Christ that day. And I met his kids 2 weeks later. He died a few days later. And when they heard that he made his commitment, it just put them to total rest. Because you just never know. Make a left, make a right. You never know who that person is that where that 5-minute presentation will say, yes, that's what I want. I want to believe. I believe in him. I believe that he's Lord. And so that was one of the things that I had to learn in my journey. The other thing I needed to learn was you have to be connected. You have to be involved if you're truly going to have your faith grow. You do not want to do this alone. This is a relationship with the Lord of the universe, but it's also a relationship with man and the congregation. And so the best way we found, because we were always in these large churches, what we called small groups, you all call them tribes, and that's where we have our best friends from all over the United States. We've lived all over the United States, and everywhere we went, we did that. That's why I met you all here at the last year at the breakfast, because I wanted to get to know you. I wanted to see what was going on. I loved that they had a men's breakfast, so I got to meet some of the men right away. And so I think it's incredibly important to do this. And then in Texas, when we went to Gateway Community Church, when we started going, there was about 1,000 people that were in the congregation at the sanctuary. Sat about 1,000 people. They had 4 services, so it was about 4,000 to 5,000 people that went to the church. Then they opened this brand new building that sat 4,500 people, and then the church grew to 40,000 people, all within 5 years. And I'm like, this is incredible. What's happening here? And Pastor Robert Morris wrote this book called The Blessed Life. And so I read that book. I remember reading it in our backyard in Texas. In Texas, it's a really pretty backyard. You have a swimming pool, but you can't sit there all the time because it got too hot. But when it wasn't hot, I sat and read this book. And this book was about tithing. The Blessed Life was about tithing. And as I understood it, I always thought, well, I'm giving, money to the church. And it's no. You're bringing the tithe. You're bringing the first fruits. And then, people always argue, well, that's an Old Testament thing, not a New Testament. No, it's in the Bible. I mean, it's amazing. After reading this book, I just totally changed my perspective. Because I wasn't tithing to the local church. I was tithing, but I was picking where it would go. But really what I learned from the Blessed Life was bringing it to the local church. And I mean, so that was just an amazing thing. And the other thing was about God's whispers, the power of God's whispers. So I did talk about, again, Pastor Robert's book, The Blessed Life. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. And then the power of God's whispers. There's a guy named Bill Hybels, Pastor Hybels, up in Willow Creek in Chicago. And he actually came to Gateway Church several times. But we actually met him when we were at a church that was also growing in Annapolis, Maryland, because we lived there too, because I just couldn't keep a job. I kept moving around the country. And it was, and the book's called Power of Whispers, Hearing God and Having the Guts to Respond. And if you haven't read that book, it really will open your eyes to that, just that whisper, that soft, one word, this is what God wants you to do. And the other lesson I learned through that journey was, the power of fellowship, about men in my life that have really made a difference. There's a much larger list, but Drew Tignanelli, I met him at a missions trip, short-term missions trip in Warsaw, Poland, of all places. And I met this guy, and he's been not only our financial advisor since 2001, he's been anything I do with my career, deciding to go on boards or anything like that. Right now I'm currently on the board of a healthcare company called Kaiser Permanente. And I go to Drew for all that advice. But Drew is more than just a financial consultant. He talks, we pray together, he guides me, and I just know when he gives me advice, I'm getting advice from where I'm not maybe listening, I'm getting something that God shared with him about what I should be doing. And then Mark Tibbles, met him in Minneapolis. He's 10 years younger, but this guy is just incredible. Again, things I struggle with, things that I'm having difficulties with. Even though he's in Minneapolis, I can reach out to him at a moment's notice. We will connect. And then Pastor Jack Hibbs. We were going to Menlo Church in Menlo Park, and we're joining the church when we just moved to Menlo Park. We lived there for 4.5 years. And there was this gentleman from New Jersey, they just moved there, and they would ask us all to share our stories, and I talked about Calvary Chapel Chino Hills, and this guy goes, you gotta be kidding me. He says, you know Pastor Jack? I said, I do, but how do you know? You're in New Jersey. Well, I had a radio station in New Jersey, and we had, it was a Christian radio station, and Pastor Jack would come and speak. So he texts Pastor Jack, and within seconds he says, my two favorite people. It was just amazing that the world is so small. And then this one really bizarre thing is I had a gentleman named Carl Wiggins who reported to me on the B-2 bomber program. And this is before I got into information technology. And he was a pastor. So he had a church on the weekend, and he worked on the bomber program. But he also had the Bible group at the B-2 bomber program. Can you imagine that? We're making weapons of mass destruction, and there's this group of people praying. And they were praying for me, and I had no idea. No idea. Until I became a Christian, they shared that with me. Matter of fact, one of the ladies that was in the Bible, she goes, we're so glad you're a Christian. We've been praying for you. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, you're like Paul. You were killing all of us here on the B-2 bomber program. And we're so glad that now you're one of us. I went, well, that's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind being like Paul. Was he shorter, though? No, just kidding. He was really 5'8". So all I'm saying is highly recommend connecting with the men here at the church. You hold each other accountable. You build each other up. It's all about edifying, right? Edification, building up, not tearing down. And it's just an incredible thing. And the other day, I was texting back and forth with Pastor Tom. I said, God, really, I'm a little nervous about coming. I'm excited, but a little nervous. And I prayed for that one word. He sent me Pastor Tom sent me the right word for me to then think about praying about what I should say here today. And that one word was joy. Don't let the devil rob your joy. From the day, from July 9th 1995. He did something where I had this always empty feeling somewhere in here that I cannot explain, that has never been back since that day. And the only thing I can think is what that is the joy of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Amen.